Hi guys, this is Kamal Fernandez from East London Dog Training. This video is about things to consider before you actually get a dog. So there's a lot of information on the internet about how to train a dog. Train a dog to sit and to down and do some really cool tricks. But there's not a lot of information to consider before you actually get a dog. And as a professional dog trainer, I'm seeing more and more dogs that probably people are struggling with because they're not paying enough time to consider the 5 points that I'm going to be giving you shortly. So recently I was involved in a project called Dogs Might Fly. So you may have seen it on Sky One at 7 p.m. on Sundays, where we took 12 rescue dogs and taught them to do the crazy task of flying a plane. So those of you that have been watching that series will see the progress that some of those dogs made. But what really hit me when we filmed them and when I met the dogs was how many of the dogs that we were dealing with that ended up in rescue through largely no fault of their own, but because they probably weren't best suited to the people that initially took them on for simple things that could have easily been prevented. So I've come up with these 5 tips, if you want to call them that are going to hopefully help people make better judgments before they actually get their dog. So the first one is make sure that you do your homework. Make sure you do your homework about the type of dog that you're getting. If you have a specific breed in mind, make sure that you take the time to research the breed. And that doesn't mean just going on Google and putting in Border Collie, for example, or Malinois or Kelpie. Make sure that you actually physically go and meet those dogs. If you can, find at least 5 examples of that breed and go and take some time to meet them. Meet them by interacting with them, meeting them by going for a walk with them, and speaking to the different owners about their experience of that specific dog. Often breeds that I deal with that have strong behavioural issues, it's because the dog's needs aren't being met. So, for example, whilst the production of Dogs Might Fly, we had dogs of very strong working type dogs that, or breeds I should say, that were in rescue through no fault of their own because they probably weren't having their needs met and therefore had behavioural problems or maybe even change of circumstances. But breeds like a Malinois, a Border Collie, a Kelpie are probably not best suited for somebody that has, not enough time to commit to exercising that dog or stimulating that dog mentally. Those dogs are hardwired genetically to need a lot of exercise. They need a lot of time. They need their brain stretched. If you don't use those attributes within those dogs, you're going to start to encounter problems, and therefore you're going to lose the joy of owning that dog and possibly end up having to rehome them. So make sure you do your homework. That's the number 1 point. Second point is make sure that you dog proof your house. Classically, what happens when people get their dogs, if they're first time dog owners, they bring their puppy home first or second night, let them have them, they may be fine. After that, they start to experience problems, i.e. the dog either may toilet around the house or the dog might damage their property. I estimate that to own a dog, it's going to cost you, I reckon, about £10,000, £10,000 to £15,000 conservatively. That's if you incorporate the dog's feeding, the dog's veterinary care, that's the dog's, if you go away on holiday, even things like having to get a vehicle to take that dog anywhere. You may have to buy a new vehicle. You may also affect the house that you choose to buy. You may need to pick a house that has a bigger garden. That's going to cost you more money. So I'd say about £10,000 to £15,000 conservatively over the span of that dog's life. Would you be willing to give me £10,000 to £15,000 and just watch me douse it with petrol and set it alight? I suspect not. So bear that in mind when you get your dog, and make sure that you dog-proof your house. Make sure that you have a house that's safe for your dog. And dogs need to be educated. You know, they don't come hardwired with how to behave in the home environment. You need to teach them. So make sure that you allocate sufficient time to educate them about how you want to be within your house. That's tip number 2. The third tip is make sure that you get the dog that you need and it's going to suit your lifestyle, not necessarily the dog that you want. So often when you see people that go on the internet or they go and watch events, they see dogs that are established, that have had a considerable amount of training, and they think that that's the type of dog that they're going to get. Big mistake. A Border Collie, for example, is a dog that you see participate in a lot of dog sports, but at the highest level, they've had a considerable amount of training and exercise and stimulation, and they're the dog that they are because of hours and hours and hours of time put into them. So looking at the finished product isn't necessarily going to give you a clear indication of that type of dog that you're going to get. So make sure that you're realistic about the time that you have to commit to that dog, the time that you're prepared to exercise that dog, and the time you're prepared to give to train that dog to behave in the way you want. Getting the dog that you may want isn't necessarily the dog that you need. So think about that when you're picking the type of dog that you're going to get. Tip 4 is really, really simple one. Make sure that you can afford the cost of a dog. So as I spoke earlier, I explained that a dog is probably going to cost you about £10,000 to £15,000. I'm setting that as an estimated figure. But realistically, looking at vet bills, potential vet bills if your dog becomes ill or injured, boarding fees if you ever need to go on holiday, possibly changing your vehicle to accommodate to take that dog on if you go out anywhere, possibly even, you know, the type of house that you live in. You may have to buy a bigger house to accommodate that dog, or you may need to be in a certain area, etc., etc. You need to be thinking about realistically that your dog's going to cost you money. Make sure that you have the funds in place, or you can certainly pay for that dog. I know it sounds like a really basic, obvious tip, but it's one that often people, they get hooked into excitement of getting a dog. They get the dog and they realise actually it's going to cost them more than they can initially estimated. So make sure that you can afford to keep them. There's loads of dogs out there that end up in rescue simply because people, you know, hit upon hard times. They can't afford them anymore. And as much as they love them, you've got to be realistic as well. A dog's not going to be cheap. You need to be able to afford them. So that's tip number 4. Make sure you can pay for the cost of owning a dog. Tip 5, probably the hardest one of all, is anticipate lifestyle changes. It's very hard to get your crystal ball out and look into the future, but some things are a little bit obvious. If you're planning on moving house or likely to go for a new job or starting a family, for family changes, you know, a new child, or, you know, circumstances changes, and that's likely to happen within the first 6 to 12 months of owning that dog, that could affect your ability to give the dog everything it needs. You know, often people sort of have job changes, which is a classic one, and they can't give the dog enough time, and therefore they're not able to keep the dog. That's something that happens quite regularly within rescues, and people have to then give their dog up, which again, really, really unfortunate. But just spend that little time before you get the dog and think, you know, what's my work commitments going to be like for the next 12 months, or what's my lifestyle going to be for the next 12 months? Can I keep this dog and give it the time that it needs and dedicate the time to train it and exercise it, etc., etc., within the next 12 months? That should hopefully, you know, get you on the path of owning that dog. You should be able to work out, you should be over the, you know, the initial most troublesome period, for example, and allow you to have, you know, years and years and years of enjoyment out of that animal. But obviously spend the time thinking about anything that could happen in the future. And, you know, some things are a little bit more predictable than others, and I accept that everybody, you know, there's things that are going to come out, unfortunately, that we can't plan for. But always be realistic about what's going to happen to your lifestyle and if there's any changes that are going to happen. So tip 5 is anticipate lifestyle changes.